Yes, so I am the one speaking today. So this is the start of my Dharma talk. Samir said it can be confusing when I'm leading a service and also speaking because he can't tell when I'm just talking and when it transitions into my actual talk. So it's transitioning now, just so you know. Yes, so today we are honoring the anniversary of the death of Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma, how many folks here have heard of Bodhidharma? In a show of hands. A little bit. Few people? Okay, cool. He is a character. So you're gonna enjoy this. You're gonna learn a lot more about him than you wanted to know, hopefully. So he was a semi-legendary Buddhist monk who lived during the 5th century CE in China. He's traditionally considered the founder of Zen Buddhism and is regarded as the person who brought that version of Buddhism into China, where it's known as Chan Buddhism. And Chan, of course, predated Zen, but it's very, very similar to what we think of as Zen now. Zen kind of arose in Japan later, but the main principles and practices of Zen came from Bodhidharma and his own understanding and practice of Buddhism. So he was said also to have begun, because he didn't have enough going on inventing Zen Buddhism, he was also said to be the one who began the physical training of the monks of Shaolin Monastery, which led to the creation of Shaolin Kung Fu. So he founded Zen and he also started Shaolin Kung Fu. So he was an overachiever. He had a lot on his plate. And his name, Bodhidharma, means the Dharma of awakening Bodhi in Sanskrit, which would loosely mean the teaching of awakening wisdom. And it's from his practices that it's understood that we can awaken. And that's one of the main principles in Zen. Is in other forms of Buddhism, you have to practice for a long time to really perfect things. Versus in Zen, you can have an instant awakening. And he is believed to have had that himself, and that's where his teachings come from. So here, I do have some slides. They're mostly pictures, but I think you'll appreciate them. So I'm going to share these off and on as I talk. And there we go. Give me a thumbs up when you can see that. Perfect. Okay, good. Yes, so this is him. And he's usually depicted in these kind of ways. He's kind of a grumpy looking guy. He was considered quite ill-mannered. And so there's not a lot of contemporary information about him. So most accounts have a lot of legend and unreliable details. And it's kind of funny because if you read original texts about him, they kind of say one thing. And then over time, like later texts, it's more and more becomes like a whole thing. So there's like the legend and legacy of Bodhidharma. So according to the principal Chinese sources, he came from what's called the Western regions. And I have a picture of the Western region. So this is in the 1st century. So if you look at this, it's kind of where it says Parthian Empire, that's sort of northeastern Iran, and then up into the Stans. So Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, in the south you have Afghanistan and even Pakistan and Uzbekistan, and then what's now sort of Tibet or Western China. So I have that. So the Western region. So he's thought generally to come from this area. If we go back to him. So depending on the text, he's described as being either like a Persian, Central Asian origin or South Indian. So in various texts say he's South Indian, and especially it's kind of funny. Sources kind of want to claim him for themselves. So a lot of Indian sources say he's South Indian. A lot of other sources say he's more Persian. It kind of depends. The ones who say South Indian say he was the 3rd son of a great Indian king or descended from a Brahmin king. And let's see, accounts differ on the date of his arrival into China. So he definitely traveled a lot. In one of his accounts himself, he said that he'd been to every country in the world, which I don't think was probably true, but he traveled a lot and definitely came and had studied Buddhism outside of China and was the one who brought it into China. And in the depictions of him, he always has big eyes, often without eyelids, which I'll tell you about soon. There's a funny story about that, although, again, I think that's just a legend. But he's not depicted as being Chinese. So the one thing we know for sure is he traveled a lot, had studied Buddhism elsewhere, and then brought Buddhism into China. Accounts differ on the date of his arrival. One early account says he arrived around like 420 CE. Others say around like 502 CE. I was especially active up in the north. So modern scholarship dates him to have come to China around the early 5th century. And the anthology of the Patriarchal Hall identifies him as the 28th patriarch of Buddhism in an uninterrupted line that extends all the way back to the original Shakyamuni Buddha. So it's said that, like, in this lineage, he came from the original Buddha, and he was the 28th main teacher of Buddhism and the first one to come into China. So he was the first Chinese patriarch. Let's see, I'm trying to see, I have various notes on him. In the first text that mentions him, it's called the Record of the Buddhist Monasteries of Luoyang from 547 CE. It was written that at that time there was a monk of the western region named Bodhidharma. He traveled from the wild borderlands to China. And as he saw the golden discs on the pole on top of our stupa reflected in the sun, the rays of light illuminated the surface of the clouds, and the jewel bells on the stupa blew in the wind, and the echoes reverberated beyond the heavens. He started singing his praises. He said, "Truly, this stupa is the work of spirits." He told us, "I'm 150 years old and have passed through numerous countries. There's virtually no country I've not visited. Even the distant Buddha realms lack a stupa such as this." And then he chanted homage and placed his palms together in salutation for days on end. And so that's the first written account of him. And then the accounts, as they go, they kind of become more and more larger than life. Let me see. So maybe I'll get to those in a little bit. So there are various practices that come from him. So he's traditionally seen as introducing Mahayana Buddhist practice. So the idea in Mahayana is that it isn't just the person themselves who's practicing who can acquire merit to help all beings reach enlightenment, but in the Theravadan, in the original tradition, you have to do it yourself, kind of, to reach nirvana. But in Mahayana, you can do this and acquire merit for all beings. So he's seen as an awakened being or a bodhisattva. So the work he's doing would not only help himself wake up, but also help others wake up. So he wrote a work called 2 Entrances and 4 Practices. And that's widely regarded as our main source of his teachings. So in this, he taught that there are 2 entrances, or ways to get into the Dharma, or the teaching. And the first is a sudden awakening that we can have. So we can just suddenly see the stupa, this beautiful stupa, and then hear the bells jingling and suddenly wake up seeing that. Or you hear a bell or a singing bowl or something like this, and you have a moment of clarity and you can wake up. And so it's the sudden awakening, which is a facet of the Zen tradition. So Zen tradition believes in a sudden awakening. And then the second entrance is through these 4 practices. So you either have a sudden awakening or one that's more gradual, and it's through practices. And then the practices, he says, are accepting that all our sufferings are the fruit of past karma, or things that we have done before, accepting our circumstances with equanimity. So just trusting that, okay, this is what happens, so this is what I'm going to have to face in my life without doing a lot of resistance. Working to be without craving, so not trying to acquire more things in our life or constantly seeking more than we have, something different than we have. And then letting go of wrong thoughts so that we can practice the 6 perfections of wisdom. And so it's kind of interesting because of the kind of poisons in Buddhism. There's craving, which is one that he specifically mentions here. There's aversion, which is the letting go of the wrong thoughts. And there's delusion, and the delusion that we're going to be separate, or that, like, our life should be different. And so he kind of, in his 4 teachings of the 4 entrances, the 4 practices, he's kind of reflecting on some of the poisons that are understood in Buddhism to add to our suffering. So in this text, he writes that those who turn back from delusion back to reality, who meditate on walls, the absence of self and the other, the oneness of a mortal and sage, who remain unmoved even by scriptures, are in complete and unspoken agreement with reason. And this is where he invented something called wall gazing. And so this, in the picture here, the one on the left, so that is a famous picture of him with his student watching him. And it said that he sat in a cave for years and years, just staring at the wall without speaking. And it kind of, it's from this practice that we have modern day Zazen. So these are Zen monks in Japan. And if you ever go to a Zen practice, it's very common that you sit very, very close to the wall, and your eyes are usually open, but looking down somewhat, often kind of where the wall meets the floor, although it doesn't have to be that way. And you just sit silently. And he was believed to have invented this practice because you don't have a lot of distractions. If you're sitting out in nature and if you're kind of sitting by the river or if you're sitting in the forest, things are moving. There are animals, there are things that you can kind of get captivated by or distracted by, but the wall doesn't really do that. So if you sit and face the wall, it sounds very boring, but then you can kind of just be with your mind. So he's thought to have invented wall gazing. You see, and yes, and also even the idea of sitting during meditation. There's a lot of walking meditations, and some sources say he was the first one to really make it important that his disciples were sitting while they were meditating rather than doing other types. So trying to make like life around you as boring or as still as possible so you could still your mind. So that's said to have come from him. So there are many koans attributed to him and also about him. So he's a very significant figure in the Zen koan tradition. And these are usually little stories that don't make any sense at face value. Like you'll hear one, what is the meaning of life? And then it's like the master hits the student with a fish. It's like a classic kind of koan, and you're like, what's that about? And it's like he wakes him up, like he gets hit with a fish, and that's the thing that wakes him up. Or, there are some here, a monk asked Zazu, what's the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West? And Zazu says, the cypress tree in front of the hall. And this is an actual koan attributed to Dogen, who collected koans. And there's a note that says, this is because Bodhidharma came from the West, unattached to any words. So he was unattached to a place. He was unattached to words, rather sitting and staring at the wall in silence, pointed directly into the mind of man, advocated seeing one's own nature and becoming the Buddha. So why would he come from the West? He was like the tree sitting in front of the hall, so like perfectly still and at one with its nature. So there's a modern collection of Zen koans where one teacher said they collected more than 1,600 of these. And a koan beginning, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? Shows up in 32 different koans, so with 32 different answers. Some of the answers are kind of funny. Why did he come from the West? Because sitting for a long time becomes tiresome. We had to walk around. Or why did he come from the West? Past the cushion. So he came from the West to teach us that we must sit. Why did he come from the West? The cow was given birth. Take good care of it. Those are one of the answers, because this is life, and now we must do what we do with what happened. So it's kind of funny. So there are different interpretations of koans, but usually you listen or you read a koan and then you just sit with it. And so he didn't invent koans, but there are lots of koans about him and by him, which are kind of funny. Let me make sure I'm getting all my slides here. Yes. So, here, before I get to that, there's a great story where it's said, so these are some popular stories about him. And again, it's hard to tell what really happened and what is just a story, but it said that he encountered Emperor Wu of Liang, and this was their exchange. And this is listed as the first koan in the Blue Cliff record of koans. Emperor Wu says, how much karmic merit have I earned for ordaining Buddhist monks, building monasteries, having sutras copied, and commissioning Buddha images? And Bodhidharma answers, none. Good deeds done with worldly intent bring good karma, but no merit. And Emperor Wu said, what's the highest meaning of noble truth then? And Bodhidharma says, there is no noble truth. There's only emptiness. And Emperor Wu says, then who are you standing before me? And Bodhidharma says, I know not, your majesty. So it's kind of his stories. He's such an enigmatic figure. He's almost like the Zen version of Socrates, where he like goes against lots of wisdom. And he's kind of like Socrates, where he's balding and very grumpy, like has the same kind of thing. And then also with the wall gazing, there's a story. So it said that when he failed to make a favorable impression in South China, he traveled to the Shaolin monastery, which we'll talk about soon. And it said at first he was refused entry, so he was grumpy. And he went to a nearby cave. And then it was said that he sat and faced a wall for 9 years there without speaking the entire time. And a popular story about this says that after 7 years, he fell asleep. And then he woke up and he became so angry with himself that he cut off his eyelids so he couldn't fall asleep again. And legend says that when they hit the floor, the first tea plants sprang up, and they could providing tea to the world as a stimulant to help Zen students stay awake while they were meditating. So that's part of why in a lot of pictures of him, he doesn't have any eyelids. Like especially in this first, in the middle one, you can see he doesn't really have eyelids. So he's awake. So supposedly tea comes from him too, because he was so rigorous with his practice. So yes. So, but it's definitely true that he went to Shaolin Monastery. So Shaolin Temple is where this red star is here in China, and I predated him. And Samir and I were talking about it this morning, and I'm glad I was because I said, I think he invented Kung Fu. And Samir said, no, that can't be right. I think he invented Shaolin Kung Fu. And so thank you, Samir. So I looked it up, and Kung Fu itself actually dates back to the Shang Dynasty around 1800 BCE. So that's a very, very old practice. And that's where the original martial arts of Kung Fu were used for self-defense, hunting, and military training. But then he himself came to Shaolin Monastery to teach meditation. And when he was doing that, it was said that he became unhappy with the poor physical condition of the monks there. So he wanted to instruct them in techniques that will help maintain their physical condition as well as their mental condition. And it's also said that they were meditating for so long that their legs were hurting. So he invented this kind of practice in order to help them so they could last in meditation longer. And so the physical exercises he taught are called the 18 Arhat hands. So these are 18 martial arts poses that are based on the forms and expressions of statues that you would see of Buddhist teachers. And so these kind of statues were found in different temples and monasteries at the time. And so based on those statues, he found these 18 poses, and he would have his students go through these 18 poses. And today, these are considered the basic forms of Shaolin Kung Fu. So I just love that he didn't have enough going on with teaching hours and hours of meditation. He had to also invent his own martial art. And Samir and I had taken Kung Fu classes with our kids for about a year here in Richmond. And so I recognize several of these poses because these are the basic poses that you go through in basic Shaolin. So yes, so he did that. And then, also with martial arts, it said that after being at Shaolin, he traveled more through Southeast Asia, and he helped spread some of these poses into Malaysia and Indonesia. And even today, it said that their martial arts had been influenced by him. So he had a very big scope in who he influenced. And then finally, he died eventually. It said that he may have died when there was a big political uprising and they were executing a lot of the leaders in his area in China. They know that one Buddhist monk was killed during that, and they think it might have been him, but it's a little unclear. But there's another account that after he died, and after his burial, Song Yong, who was an official of one of the later Wei kingdoms, encountered him on the road. And it said that he was carrying a single sandal, like you see here. And then when they were speaking, Bodhidharma predicted the death of Song Yong's ruler. And then when Song Yong got back home, he found out that ruler had died. And so they actually opened up the tomb to see if Bodhidharma was still there. And all they found was a single sandal and no body or anything else. So you'll see a lot of pictures and statues and things of him just carrying his single sandal. So he's quite a character. So his legacy today, so his image has become the inspiration for these Daruma dolls. Daruma is actually the Japanese name for Bodhidharma. And these are good luck charms. So you see all of them look quite angry like him. So again, he was quite a grumpy character. And so these have continued on since him. And so these are very popular. People give them to other people as good luck charms. And they have kind of the round body, but no legs, because it said that he sat for so long that his legs atrophied. And that's why these don't have any legs. So they're just these little round balls. And every year there's a Daruma doll festival in Japan, and over 400,000 people come to celebrate him and purchase new dolls. So it's pretty enormous. So that is Bodhidharma. So he's quite a character. And but I thought you'd appreciate hearing that. And so we honor him today. It's said to be the anniversary of his death.